I'm a survivor. I was taken away from my parents at the age of 6. And I was put into the residential school where I literally cried when I saw my parents go away after the government came and took me.
Starting in 1834, residential schools were conceived by the Canadian government and Christian churches as an attempt to both educate and convert Indigenous youth to integrate them into Canadian society, under the objective of, quote, killing the Indian in the child, unquote.
We've lost every identity to the point of becoming very dependent on somebody else. We've lost our independence. We've lost our language. We've lost our value systems. We've lost our who we are, to think like who we are. And that's the impact of the residential school.
So how do you do that? Well, you remove them from their parents. You punish them when they speak their language. You punish them when they try to run away from school. It was mainly a lot of physical abuse, cultural and spiritual abuse, sexual abuse, worst of all.
And they kept us there and they said, okay, you got to learn our way. And that totally changed who we are.
An estimated 150,000 First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children attended residential schools.
For 150 years in Canada, the government had a policy of trying to assimilate Native children, Indigenous children in Canada, so they would kill the Indian in the child. That was the objective. And that the only way they could cure this problem, as they saw it, the politicians at the time, was to convert these brown children into white children, because they thought that if they were raised by savages, it doesn't matter if they could read or write, they would still be savages. That was literally what our Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, said.
All of this came to light in the early 90s, and many court cases were started as a result of that. A Truth Commission was established to give a voice to the thousands of victims.
It was kept secret for many, many years. Most Canadians that are non-Indigenous weren't aware of this.
It was the saddest, darkest, most unknown chapter in Canadian history. But with the Truth Commission, everything went public. Public meetings were held across the country. Private meetings were also held to gather stories about the truth of what happened to children in these residential schools. But the important question is then, what do you do about the truth? How can you restore respectful relationships? How can you improve relationships between Indigenous peoples in Canada, either among ourselves, with our neighbors, or the rest of Canada?
So instead of following British common law or French civil law in terms of constructing this settlement, we went to Indigenous legal principles, and that's where the magic happened. In colonial law, the only remedies we could have gotten for the survivors would have been money. Money for physical damage, money for sexual and psychological damage. End of story. But their priorities were healing, being able to tell their story, what happened to them. They wanted to respect those who had passed, who had never had any kind of recognition. So they wanted commemoration. They wanted apologies. They want to tell what's happened to them and how they feel about it. We found that in our work on this case. People would line up by the hundreds in front of the microphone because they wanted to tell their truth. And that's so important for people, because until you can tell your truth, you can't take the next step.
It's very, very important because it's a healing experience. No longer can you or should you internalize the harm. You can talk about it openly. It is a difficult thing to do. I had to do it myself because I was put into 3 schools for 14 years. And I kept that story to myself. I didn't tell my children until later on. I didn't tell my wife till later on. Now that I have, it really was difficult at the time But now we've been healing together as a family, and it's much, much better. It made us a stronger family. Because you'll hurt yourself if you keep internalizing the anger. But if you share it with others, it really helps your journey as far as healing. I think the other important element is being able to forgive. If your perpetrator says to you, "I'm sorry," you have to be able to find in yourself the ability to forgive that person. Otherwise, you'll stay stuck. So it's a part of the healing journey. Forgiveness is important. Sharing your story is important because it really sets you free.
We're in that rediscovery era after disruption by the residential school. We're rediscovering who we are. We're rediscovering our languages. We're rediscovering how we survive and how we manage the land and the resources. One of my grandfathers said, grandson, if you're going to survive in the future, because there's a totally new world that has been brought here from overseas. And if you're going to survive, you got to take the best of the two worlds and make it work. Don't ever forget the spirituality, your connection to the land, and your connection to nature. Don't ever forget that, and your language. But also use the science and technology of the modern world to see how you can make it. There's some sacrifices we have to make. There's compromises that we have to make. And there are bridges that we have to build to make sure that we establish a respectful, mutually agreed, harmonious relationship so that we can make sure that we protect whatever we have to continue to give life.